Hello and welcome back to the Gubba Homestead. I'm Gubba, a first-time homesteader following in the footsteps of my homesteading forebears. And today we are going to be doing something super fun. We're going to be canning homemade bone broth. So before we get into that, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications so you never miss another Gubba Homestead adventure video to follow along with my homesteading story. All right, so in here, I've had my bone broth going for about 24 hours. My house smells amazing and it's so stinking easy to make. So I had 4 chicken carcasses from the canned chicken that we did, and I took those carcasses and I roasted them in the oven to get more flavor out of them. And then I put those carcasses in here, and then I put in frozen vegetable scraps, which is like carrot ends, celery, onion ends that I have just been accumulating because those would have either been thrown away or gone bad. So instead I froze them and saved them. And then I filled it up with water and then just let her roast for 24 hours on 250. So, oh man, I'm not even kidding, my house smells so good. And today we're gonna be using a fine mesh strainer, which will be straining into this, which is a fat separating measuring cup. So we want to separate out the fat because we don't want to can the fat, and the fats, according to my research, can make the flavor of the broth a little funky or make it go bad, and we do not want that. We've put so much work into this, so we don't want that. So we're going to be straining it to get out the particles, and then we're going to be making sure we don't get any fat. I'm going to be ladling into here, and we're going to be using this canning little measuring tool because we need a 1-inch headspace, and headspace is the distance from the top to whatever you're canning, the top of wherever you're canning. So we need 1 inch. And this is the 1 inch. So it's about right here where it curves up to the neck of the jar. So that's what we're going to be filling to. You can also freeze your bone broth, put it in the fridge. I'm not sure if I already said that, but you can freeze it, can it, and yeah, that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm also using a funnel so we don't make a huge mess, because you know me, in my kitchen, I make a mess. So I'm telling you guys, it literally looks beautiful. And the fat separator did come with a strainer, but the holes are too big. I'm using a fine mesh one because there's going to be a lot of broken up chunks. All right, let's get to it. Here is the up close of my broth. You can see that it has been stewing, and we have lost some water that has evaporated during the process. So this is a very concentrated bone broth. You would be able to water it down because it's going to be so concentrated to keep it going, but oh man, look how beautiful it is. You can also see the fat starting to come on the surface because I turned it down. And so that's what we're going to be separating out. Let's get to it. All right, so I did a little test run to see what was going to work best. I ended up grabbing a cheesecloth from my kitchen tools because I was finding that when I was straining, I was still getting little chunks into my bone broth, and I just want to have a pure bone broth, and this cheesecloth is what's going to do it for me. So this fine mesh strainer is going to get out all the big chunks, but the cheesecloth is going to get out all the fine chunks, and that is what I want. I just want to have a pure, beautiful broth. And then, so we're pouring it into the fat separator right now, so I'm just ladling in. And we don't want to be canning the fat. We don't want any of the fat in, whether we're freezing or anything, because I read that the fat can make the taste go sour fast, and that's just something that we don't want. And like I showed you when we looked at, let's see how far we're at the top of the broth, you could kind of see a layer starting. So I'm just going to keep on pouring in until we get right about to the top. 100% would recommend having a cheesecloth on hand. I feel like I use my cheesecloth a lot. I use it for making lotion, doing other projects in my kitchen. Just helps me with that fine straining when I want something pure. And I'm really wondering how much we're going to be getting. And I'm wanting to can. All right. Oh, I might have to rotate my cheesecloth if it's becoming so full of specks so soon. Oh no. Look, you can kind of see the layer of fat. So we're just gonna pour this into here and leave a 1-inch headspace. And when we get close to the bottom, I am going to put the fat into a separate bowl. Oh, this is so beautiful. All right. Still do a little more. Okay. Yep, and now I'm going to put the fat into another bowl, and I will just use this right away for some other recipes this week. I need to strain just a little bit more. Look at all that it's catching. Oh my. It's catching a lot. This is definitely some pure broth. Probably about another ladle. But I'll do a few more just so then we can get that fat separating layer. And I'm trying my best not to spill because I don't want to lose any of this broth that took so long and was such a process to make. And oh man. All right, help it get straining. And then I will just hand wash this cheesecloth after. If it didn't have so many fine particles on it, I'd just throw it into the washer and dryer, but I don't want all of the beef to be going into my washer and dryer. Or not the beef, the chicken broth. All right. And right to a 1-inch headspace. That's where we're at. Look at that. Let me just double check. Yep. Right at 1 inch. That's beautiful. I'm going to use vinegar to clean the tops. Just make sure that there's nothing that could inhibit the seal. And I'm also checking to see if there's any cracks or nicks. And there's not. Looking so good. And we got 1 jar ready to go. And this broth is hot, and you want your jars to be hot before you can. Okay, so I have 2 to 3 inches in my canner. That is what my canner's instructions call for, of hot water. So it's hot water. We're going to be putting our cans in there, or our jars. So again, because we are canning both the quarts and the pints, we will be processing according to the quart time. So you always want to process according to the longer time if you're doing a mix between the different jar sizes. So we have our hot water. We're going to be putting the lid on, securing the lid, and then we're going to wait for the steam and just go according, and I will take you through the process. So before you ever start to get canning with your All-American, and I believe all canners, you will want to make sure that this little valve here, you'll lift it up and see if you can see through it. Make sure there's nothing obstructing it. And then for the All-American, you also want to put just a layer of olive oil right around here, so then it keeps it lubricated and it doesn't, because it has a metal to metal seal right here, so keeps it nice. And you always secure the opposite bolts, so at the same time. So put those in. So the water's already warm, so I'm just going to turn that down for now because I don't want it to start steaming or doing anything while I'm putting the lid on. Then I'll just go around, make sure they're all tight. All right, we're good to go. So you want to make sure that this distance is uniform throughout. And if it's not, then you will just loosen one side and while you tighten the other to make it uniform, because you wouldn't want this gap to be way high and this gap to be way low. So we have our lid secured. I just turned it to high, and then the next step in the process is we're going to wait for steam to be escaping from this spout for 10 minutes, and then we'll put on the gauge and then keep going along in the process. All right, so we have a steady stream of steam coming out of our vent right there. So I'm gonna set a timer for 10 minutes. We're gonna let this vent for 10 minutes, and then we're gonna put on our weighted pressure gauge. All right, this has been venting for 10 minutes. So now we're going to put on the weighted gauge. This is for my pressure canner, and because I am above 1,000 feet in elevation, I'm gonna be using 15 pounds of pressure. So now we're gonna wait for that to wiggle, and then we will start our time, and we want it ideally to wiggle 1 to 4 times a minute during that 25-minute period. And another thing, you don't want it to just continuously wiggle, 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 because then steam is constantly being let out, and you don't want to run this dry. So running this dry means you run out of water, and that could damage your canner and potentially beyond repair, probably beyond repair. So we're gonna wait for this to wiggle, and I will show you guys what that looks like. All right, so I just had my first wiggle on here. So we're gonna start the timer for 25 minutes. That's a wiggle. And I don't want it to constantly do that the whole time. I'm going to be turning down my stove. The geared gauge is also at 15. Yeah, you definitely do not want it to do that, because if it does it the whole time, this could run dry. You could run out of water. All the water will just evaporate into steam, and then you'd be really sad. So I just turned it down. This will stop wiggling. For my stove, I'm right around low. And the more that you can, the more you're going to be able to know what works for the wiggling and what is the ideal temperature to have your stove at to get 1 to 4 wiggles a minute. And this is just going to come down, and this is just for reference only. I will need that to wiggle 1 to 4 times a minute. We're good. But yeah, we're at 15 pounds of pressure. So yeah, just going to wait for that, and it will come down. This is what happened last time. Yep, there it is. It already stopped. And now I'm just going, there's one. But it's slowing down. You can see with the wiggles. And then 1 to 4 times a minute, and we're good. So yeah, I'll see you guys in 23 minutes. Another way to know if your broth is done is if you find a bone. So I have a canner growing right now, but this is just a good example for you guys. You find it and it just falls apart just like that. Yeah, ooh, look at all that goodness. Oh gosh, and this is what's canning right now. I cannot wait to see the finished product. All right, so the timer is going off, and I'm just gonna turn this off. I'm not gonna move it. I'm not gonna do anything. I'm gonna let that pressure come down naturally, and then after this is at 0, we'll take that off for a few, and then we can open it up and see our canned broth. So I've turned it off, and I'm just watching the pressure dip, and we want it all the way to 0. So the geared gauge is reading 0, so I'm gonna take off the weighted gauge and let this sit for 2 minutes. All right, it's been 2 minutes without the weighted gauge on, so I'm gonna open her up and let's get the chicken out. All right, so the pressure gauge reads 0. We took off the weighted gauge and we waited for 2 minutes, and I've even let it wait even longer just to let it cool down a bit. So we're gonna take off the wing nuts. It's still a little warm. And I do the opposite ends, I need some muscle for this. There we go. I am so excited to see our canned broth. I don't know if you guys could hear that, but the lids on some of these are popping already and they're sealing. So that's exciting. I'm gonna get my jar clampers and bring them up. This is the cutest towel ever. I just gotta show you guys. Isn't that so cute? Okay. So these jars are hot, hot, hot. You definitely need a jar grabber. All right, here's our canned broth. And as you can see on here, there is some calcium. If you put vinegar, in your canner, it should help with this calcium buildup and won't do it as much. I've done that before with my water bath canner. It's not a big deal. It doesn't hurt anything. It's just more like now I gotta clean off these, but I will let these sit undisturbed for 24 hours before I move them anywhere, but we did it. I would like to note there are a bit of residual, I believe this is the fat, and you know, it's just some other things that got into the broth, but that is accounted for in the processing time for the canning, so this is totally okay. And I'm just excited. Look at this, imagine the soups. Oh man. All right, I would consider this a huge success. Oh man, I am just so stinking excited to have home canned broth. There's just nothing like it. And it's from things that were originally going to be scraps. So like the chicken carcass, I could have given that to my dogs before it was cooked, or just thrown it out or whatever. But instead it went into making the broth, and then the scraps from the vegetables that would have just been thrown out, composted, whatever. And then trying to think what else, water. Literally, it was that simple, and I made broth, and this is gonna make a lot of recipes for me. Even so, the fat that I strained out and then the residual that's in the pot right now, I'm gonna make something tonight for dinner, maybe like a chicken soup or something. But thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this informative, fun. I wish you guys could smell it because it just smells so stinking good. So don't do anything you won't do, and thank you for spending time with me. You guys are the best. Bye.